Capital expenses, or CapEx, and how they relate to rental properties. So CapEx, capital expenses, are those items that we anticipate, that we already know will mechanically fail. So we know that a central air unit had a life expectancy of 20 years. Now it's a little bit closer to 15. We know a roof has a life expectancy of 20 years. We know the hot water heater has a life expectancy of 8 years. So when you're collecting your rent, let's say it's $1,000, it's not fair to actually take that $1,000 as your own, as your profit. Not when in 8 years we know you're going to have to spend $1,200 to replace the hot water heater. So all this time you should have been taking, at least mentally, taking some of that money and putting it aside for that eventual repair that you're going to have. Now, a lot of investors seem to do a percentage, and I don't really understand why. I think actually if you're investing into a lot of properties, it makes it more efficient to do a percentage. And it's true, a more expensive property is going to have a tendency to be a little more expensive. So you're going to have a higher quality central air unit. You're certainly going to have higher quality finished materials like tile and things of that nature. But it's really not going to be that much higher of an expense. So I prefer to actually just to do a dollar amount, even though I know some investors will put away. I mean, I've heard crazy numbers like 20% of the properties, the incoming income, the rents that you're actually collecting, they'll put aside for capital expenses. I've heard 10%. Very common one is like 5.7%. I simply just do a dollar amount. Now I live in Philadelphia and I manage row homes, and we own row homes. So our expenses are far less expensive. Our roofs, for example, are really a $4,000, $5,000 expense compared to, the suburbs. That's a fraction of the cost. So I'll just do a dollar amount. To be frank, actually, $120 a month pretty much covers any expense that we're going to face in a Philadelphia property. So I understand that's not consistent with what most folks and most investors are dealing with in the country, but I personally would more accurately come up with a dollar amount rather than to do a percentage. Now, there's additional expense that's really want to be covered under capital expenses, and this doesn't come up as much, but if you have poor quality tenants, so if you're investing in lower quality rentals, then you're going to have to come up with a dollar amount for tenant nonsense. So the eventuality of having to perhaps evict a tenant, which in the better quality homes you don't tend to have to do, or the tenant caused damage. So the tenants aren't going to damage the hot water heater. They're not going to damage the roof. They're not going to damage things of that nature. Those are mechanical failures. But if the tenants tend to be a little bit more full of nonsense because of the price point you're at, then you would want to put aside an additional amount of money, at least mentally, to cover that. So if every 4 years you're going to get a bad tenant that you're going to have to evict, all that time you should have been putting aside money, again, at least mentally, for the eventual vacancy, or not vacancy, the missed months of rent, and also the expense to evict them. All right, so capital expenses, definitely put some money aside. Most investors do it by a percentage. I prefer to do it by a dollar amount. And good luck with your real estate investing.